A young sailor stands on the verge of everything he has ever wanted. He's about to marry the woman he loves, take command of his own ship, and begin a promising new life. Then, on his wedding day, it is all torn away. Edmond Dantès is falsely accused of treason, imprisoned without trial, and abandoned inside the grim fortress of the Château d'If. Years later, he escapes carrying the secret of a hidden fortune and returns under a new identity, the wealthy, mysterious, and seemingly all-powerful Count of Monte Cristo. Now he has the money, influence, patience, and determination to destroy every man who betrayed him. But as his carefully planned revenge begins to unfold, one question becomes impossible to ignore. Can Edmond punish the guilty without becoming even more ruthless and dangerous than the men who ruined his life? This is The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. I'm Roger Braveheart, and a very warm welcome to the Classic Tales by Firelight channel. Here, some of the world's greatest classic stories are retold in a clear, entertaining, and atmospheric style that is easy to follow and enjoyable to listen to. You can settle back and give the story your full attention, or simply leave it playing in the background while you work, travel, relax, or get on with something else. In this extraordinary tale, Edmond Dantès is transformed from an innocent young sailor into the wealthy and mysterious Count of Monte Cristo. Along the way, you'll discover why this remains one of the greatest stories of betrayal, wrongful imprisonment, escape, hidden treasure, romance, justice, and carefully planned revenge ever written. By the end, you'll understand the main events, characters, and ideas well enough to remember the story and speak confidently about it with others. My challenge is to transform this enormous and remarkable novel into an exciting and atmospheric retelling while preserving the important events, relationships, mysteries, and emotional impact of the original story. Most of the summarized stories on this channel are around 75 minutes long, which is considerably shorter than the 15 hours or more it might take to read the complete novel. I previously experimented with 30-minute summaries, but I found that too much of the plot, character development, and atmosphere had to be removed, and the story suffered as a result. The longer format gives the story more room to breathe while still offering a much shorter and more accessible way to experience this great classic. This retelling is based on Alexandre Dumas' original novel, rather than on any of the many modern films or adaptations, which may have altered characters, events, or details through the use of artistic license. Okay, so without further delay, let's get cracking. On a February day in 1815, the ship Fernand comes home to Marseille, and the whole town seems to turn out to watch her. Her captain has died of brain fever on the voyage, and it is a young sailor, Edmond Dantès, who brings her in with the calm skill of a born commander. The ship owner comes aboard at once, and everything Edmond says pleases him. The cargo is safe, the crew loves him, and the owner tells him plainly that the Fernand cannot sail without her new captain. Edmond's future is made. Better still, he is to marry Mercedes, the beautiful Catalan girl he adores, the moment he can arrange it. But happiness like that gathers enemies quietly. The ship's clerk, Danglars, watches Edmond with a look full of hate. He wants no young upstart promoted over him. In the Catalan village, Mercedes' cousin Fernand, who has loved her for years and been refused 100 times, hears her say that she loves Edmond Dantès, and none but Edmond shall ever be her husband. Fernand is driven half mad. And the neighbour, a tailor named Caderousse, is a man who likes wine, gossip, and other people's money. Danglars and Caderousses drink together, and Fernand stumbles on them, fresh from hearing Mercedes promise herself to Edmond. Danglars sees his weapon. If Edmond cannot be killed, he can be removed. He calls for pen and ink, and, writing with his left hand, so the hand cannot be known, composes an anonymous letter to the king's attorney. It says that Edmond Dantès, mate of the Fernand, touched at Elba, and is carrying a letter from the usurper Napoleon to a Bonapartist committee in Paris, and that the letter will be found on him at his father's or in his cabin. Danglars crumples the letter and throws it aside as if it were a joke, but Fernand picks it up and posts it. Meanwhile, Edmond's joy only grows. He tells his old father about the captaincy. The old man had nearly starved because Caderousse called in a debt, and Edmond empties his pockets for him. The wedding feast is set at La Réserve. The shipowner himself attends, and Mercédès places Fernand at her side as a brother. Edmond tells the guests the ceremony is in an hour and a half. Then, as the wine flows, soldiers come. A magistrate asks who answers to the name Edmond Dantès, and arrests him in the name of the law. Mercédès cries after him from the balcony. He calls back that they will soon meet again. The shipowner hurries to the deputy prosecutor, Gérard de Villefort, to plead for his sailor. Villefort is himself betrothed that very day to an aristocratic bride, and he begins the examination half in sympathy. The prisoner is 19 francs and clearly innocent of politics. Edmond tells him everything. His dying captain had ordered him to carry a packet to Elba. There the Grand Marshal gave him a letter to deliver to an address in Paris. It was his captain's last command, sacred to a sailor. Villefort is ready to release him, and then he asks to whom the letter is addressed. To Monsieur Noirtier, Rue Coq-Héron, Paris. Noirtier is Villefort's own father, a known Bonapartist, and the young prosecutor's whole career rests on being a fierce royalist. If that letter is found, he is ruined. Villefort burns it in front of Edmond, makes him swear never to speak the name Noirtier, and tells him he will be held only a little longer for his own good. Then, instead of freeing him, Villefort has Edmond taken by night, by carriage and boat, past the very rocks where Mercédès' single light burns, to the Château d'If, the island fortress of political prisoners. Edmond begs a gendarme to say where they are going, hears the name of the fortress, tries to throw himself into the sea, and is dragged up the steps and locked in a cell, asking the walls what crime he has committed. So the trap closes on an innocent man, laid by 3 men with 3 different motives: Danglars out of ambition, Fernand out of love, and a prosecutor out of fear for his name. Edmond's wedding day ends in a dungeon, and no one who did it expects ever to hear of him again. Edmond Dantès spends his first night in the Château d'If, standing up, weeping, certain it is all a mistake that will be corrected by morning. It is not corrected. He demands the governor. The jailer refuses. He offers money to carry word to Mercédès. The jailer laughs and reports him, and Edmond is thrown into a dungeon below, among prisoners said to be mad. While Edmond vanishes, Villefort races to Paris. He has convinced himself that this one innocent man is the price of his career, and he means to be first to warn the king that Napoleon is arming to leave Elba. At the Tuileries, King Louis XVI jokes with his courtiers and barely listens, until the police minister bursts in with news that the usurper has already landed in France. The king, shaken, rewards Villefort with the Cross of the Legion of Honor. That same day, Villefort receives a visitor, his own father, Noirtier, the Bonapartist, whom the royal police are hunting in connection with the general's murder. Father and son talk coolly. Noirtier knows everything, even the secret police reports, and predicts Napoleon's triumph. Then, in front of his son, he shaves off the black whiskers the police are looking for, changes his coat and hat, and walks out past the men waiting to arrest him. Villefort hurries back to Marseille, trembling between ambition and fear. Noirtier is right. Napoleon sweeps through France, the 100 days begin, and the whole country turns upside down. The worthy shipowner now hopes, under Napoleon, a supposed Bonapartist prisoner should be freed. He goes to Villefort, who has kept his post through the change of regime, and begs for Edmond's release. Villefort, smooth as ice, pretends to help. He dictates a petition for the shipowner to sign, praises Edmond as a patriot, and promises to send it to Paris himself, then locks it away, because it would prove Edmond's dangerous connection to Napoleon, and keeps Edmond buried. Twice the shipowner comes back, twice he is soothed. Then comes Waterloo, and with it the Second Restoration. Villefort moves to Toulouse and marries his aristocratic bride. Edmond, forgotten by earth and heaven, stays in his cell. The others scatter. Danglars, safe and sly, feels the wind change and slips away to Madrid, with a recommendation from the shipowner, who never suspects him. Fernand is conscripted, and before he goes, Mercedes begs him to take care of himself, for if he dies, she will be alone. Those words give him hope. Mercedes herself wanders the village and the cliffs, weeping, waiting, kept from the sea only by her faith. Old Dantès, who lived on hope, loses it when Napoleon falls. 5 months after his son's arrest, he dies in Mercedes's arms, cursing those who had caused his misery, yet blessing his absent boy. If she ever sees Edmond again, she is to tell him his father died blessing him. The shipowner quietly pays for the funeral and the old man's small debts, an act of courage in a royalist city. A year later, an inspector of prisons tours the Château d'If. Edmond, hearing of it, pours out his heart. He asks not for pardon, but for a trial, to know his crime and his sentence. The inspector is touched and promises to examine his case. Then he visits the famous madman, the Abbé Faria, an old Italian prisoner who offers the government millions for his freedom and talks of a hidden treasure. Everyone laughs at him. When the inspector checks the register, he finds, against Edmond's name, in another hand, a note, violent Bonapartist, took an active part in the return from Elba, to be watched with the greatest care. He writes beneath it, nothing to be done. Hope, briefly lit, dies again. A new governor comes who does not bother to learn the prisoners' names, only their numbers. The fortress has 50 cells, and the young man who entered it as Edmond Dantès, beloved of his crew, son of a poor father, betrothed of a beautiful girl, is no longer called Edmond Dantès. He is number 34. Number 34 passes through every torment a prisoner can know. First pride in his innocence, then doubt of it, then begging, then prayer, then rage. He dashes himself against the walls and curses the men who put him there. When even hatred exhausts him, despair arrives. Edmond Dantès decides to die by starving himself, and day after day he throws his food out of the loophole, growing weaker, welcoming the darkness. Then one evening he hears a scratching in the wall. Hope, almost dead, stirs. He knocks. The sound stops. Days later it resumes, and by breaking his jug and using a saucepan handle as a lever, he loosens a stone. A voice answers him from the other side. Another prisoner, number 27, who has spent years digging toward the outer wall and come out 15 feet wrong into Edmond's cell. After fearful waiting, the floor gives way and an old man climbs through, small, white-haired, ragged, with burning eyes. It is the Abbé Faria, the learned Italian everyone calls mad. The abbé shows Edmond his marvels, tools made from bed irons, a chisel, a rope ladder from shirts, pens of fish cartilage, ink of soot and wine, a treatise written on linen. He reads the hour from a ray of sunlight on the wall. Edmond, half worshipping him, asks the question that has tormented him. Why is he here? The abbé teaches him to ask a colder question. Who profits from your ruin? Piece by piece they reconstruct it. the captaincy, and the bride 2 prizes: the anonymous letter, written left-handed in a disguised hand, and Faria writes the same words with his own left hand, and the letters match. Danglars the clerk who passed the captain's door and saw the packet, Fernand the rival, and the prosecutor who burned the only proof because the letter was addressed to Noirtier, his father. Edmond sees it all, and in that hour something in him hardens into a vow of vengeance. Faria becomes his teacher. Languages, history, mathematics, chemistry, the ways of the world. They plan an escape, a tunnel under the sentry's gallery, a loosened flagstone, a rope ladder to the sea. But the abbé's body fails. A cataleptic fit seizes him. Edmond saves him with drops from a hidden phial, but the old man is left with a paralyzed arm. Knowing his time is short, Faria tells him the secret behind his supposed madness. He was secretary to Cardinal Spada, last of a great Roman family. The cardinal, fearing the Borgias, buried his fortune and left a will hidden in a breviary. The will, burned, was written in sympathetic ink that fire reveals. Faria reconstructed it. In the caves of the little island of Monte Cristo lies the treasure. Ingots, gold, jewels, nearly 2 millions of Roman crowns. In the farthest angle of the second opening. He makes Edmond learn it by heart, and calls him his son. The third attack comes at night. Faria dies, despite every drop of the remedy. Edmond watches them sew the body into a sack, hears them say, "The Château d'If has no cemetery. The dead go into the sea." Alone and desperate, he makes the wildest decision of his life. He carries the corpse through the tunnel to his own bed, covers it like a sleeping man, sews himself into the sack with a knife and lies still. Gravediggers take him up, joke about his weight, tie a 36-pound shot to his feet, and swing him out over the rocks. 1, 2, 3. He falls, plunges into icy water, rips the sack open, cuts the cord at his legs, and rises to the surface, free. Through a night of storm he swims, guided by a distant light, until his hands strike the rocks of the island of Tiboulen, and he lies on the granite as thunder splits the sky, a dead man returned to life. At dawn, a Genoese tartan picks up the half-drowned swimmer. Edmond Dantès invents a story. He is a Maltese sailor wrecked in the storm. The crew, smugglers by trade, take him in, and one of them, a good-hearted seaman named Jacopo, saves him as he sinks. As they sail, a white puff of smoke rises from the Château d'If, and a gun is heard. A prisoner has escaped, Edmond tells the captain calmly, and drinks his rum. He asks the date. It is 1829, 14 years since his arrest. He was 19. He is 33. He renews his oath of vengeance against Danglars, Fernand, and Villefort. At Leghorn, a barber cuts the beard and hair of 14 years, and Edmond looks at a stranger, pale, lined, intellectual, unrecognizable. He sails with the smugglers, learns their ways, and at last gets his chance, a landing on the deserted island of Monte Cristo. He slips away from the crew, finds the guiding marks cut in the rocks, feigns a fall and an injury, and is left behind with a gun, a pickaxe, and supplies. Alone, he uncovers a great round rock, blasts its wedge with powder, rolls it aside, and descends into the caves. In the second grotto he breaks a stucco wall, digs, and strikes iron and wood, a chest bearing the arms of the Spada family. Inside are gold coins, ingots, and handfuls of diamonds, pearls, and rubies. The abbé was not mad. The treasure is real, and it is his. He hides the cave carefully, returns with the smugglers, sells a few small diamonds, buys a fast yacht with secret compartments built into it, and moves the whole fortune aboard. Jacopo brings him news from Marseille. His father is dead, and Mercedes has disappeared. The Count, for so we must begin to call him, returns to Marseille as an Englishman, Lord Wilmore, with a passport no one questions. He buys his father's little house in the Allées de Meilhan, weeps in the room where the old man died, and rewards the young tenants and a poor fisher family with astonishing gifts. Then, disguised as an Italian priest, the Abbé Busoni, he visits an inn on the road to Beaucaire, kept by a worn-out, envious couple, the tailor Caderousse and his wife. The false abbé claims he attended Edmond Dantès' deathbed and carries a diamond Edmond left to be shared among his faithful friends, his father, Mercedes, Caderousse, Danglars, and Fernand. Slowly, with the diamond glittering between them, the Count draws the whole story out of Caderousse. How Danglars wrote the denunciation, and Fernand posted it, while Caderousse, drunk, did nothing. How old Dantès starved to death. How the ship-owner has been ruined. How Danglars rose to be a millionaire banker and baron. How Fernand, through war and treachery, became a general, and the Count of Morcerf, rich and titled, with a mansion in Paris. And how Mercedes, after 18 months of mourning, married Fernand, and is now a great lady with a son. The abbé gives Caderousse the diamond, worth 50,000 francs, and takes in exchange the red silk purse the ship owner once left on old Dantès' mantelpiece. One proof remains. Posing as a clerk of a Roman banking house, the Count visits the prison inspector and buys up the ship owner's failing credit for ready money. In return, he asks to see the Château d'If register. He reads his own file, the accusation, the examination, the shipowner's petition, and against his name the note in Villefort's handwriting. Violent Bonapartist. Nothing to be done. He folds Danglars' anonymous letter, stolen from the file, and puts it in his pocket. Now he knows everything, and he has the means for everything. The Count turns toward Paris, where his enemies enjoy their fortunes, and toward the ship-owner, who alone stood faithful, and who is 3 days from ruin and suicide. The ship-owner, Morel, is at the edge of destruction. His ships are lost, his credit is gone, and 300,000 francs fall due. Into his counting-house walks a calm English clerk from a Roman bank, holding his bills, and instead of demanding payment, he gives Morel 3 months' grace. Then he quietly tells the daughter Julie that one day she will receive a letter signed Sinbad the Sailor, and she must obey it exactly. The fatal 5th of September comes. Morel has 15,000 francs against nearly 300,000, and has resolved to die with honour rather than live dishonoured. His son Maximilian, a young soldier of iron principle, takes off his epaulettes and chooses to live for his mother and sister. At 11 o'clock the clock strikes, and Julie bursts in, sent by the strange letter to a house in the Allées de Meilhan, carrying a red silk purse. Inside is the receipted bill for the whole sum and a diamond marked Julie's dowry. At the same moment a shout goes up from the harbour. The Pharaon is signalled. She is a new ship, built in secret, with the same name, the same cargo, the same captain and old crew. A miracle no one understands. Morel and his family weep with joy while, behind a sentry box, a bearded man watches, whispers a blessing on their noble hearts, and declares his own work of rewarding the good complete. Now, he says, the god of vengeance yields him his power to punish the wicked. The scene shifts to Rome years later, where 2 young Parisians are travelling. Albert de Morcerf, Viscount, Fernand and Mercedes' son, though he does not yet know what that name hides, and his friend Franz. They are told of a mysterious host who lives in a cave on the island of Monte Cristo and calls himself Sinbad the Sailor. Franz, curious, lands and is blindfolded and led into a grotto of impossible luxury. Carpets, statues, swords, fruit from every country, served by a mute Nubian. The host, pale and magnetic, feeds him hashish, and Franz dreams of marble goddesses and wakes on the sand, half convinced it was a vision. Back in Rome, the friends hear of the famous bandit chief Luigi Vampa, and the hotel keeper tells his story. A shepherd boy who taught himself to read, carve and shoot, who loved the shepherdess Teresa, who killed the bandit Cucumetto for carrying her off, and was chosen captain by the bandits themselves. That night, in the moonlit Colosseum, Franz hides and overhears two men. One is the bandit chief. The other, cloaked, promises to save a condemned young shepherd named Peppino from execution, not by force, but by gold. The voice is unmistakable. It is Sinbad the Sailor, Franz's host from the cave. The executions come. In the Piazza del Popolo, before a vast crowd, one prisoner is pardoned by a friar's document at the scaffold's foot, Peppino, while the other, a murderer who had counted on dying alongside him, rages and is killed by the mace, a sight that fills Franz with horror and the watching stranger with a terrible, satisfied calm. The stranger's window at the palace, hung with white damask and a red cross, has already told the bandits that the pardon succeeded. By now, the listener understands that Sinbad, the sailor, the English lord, the Italian abbé, and the rich Count of Monte Cristo are one man, Edmond Dantès, returned with limitless wealth and a long memory. Through Peppino's rescue, he has bound the Roman bandits to himself. Through the pardon, he has shown his method. Patient, silent, unstoppable. In Rome, he is only passing through. His road leads to Paris, where Albert de Morcerf, unsuspecting, has promised to introduce him to society, the society of Danglars, of Villefort, and of his own father, the Count of Morcerf. The carnival turns Rome upside down. Confetti, masks, flowers, and a young viscount chasing adventure. Albert de Morcerf flirts with a masked peasant girl in a carriage, wins her violets and a rendezvous, and walks straight into a trap. The girl is bait set by the bandit chief, and Albert is kidnapped and held for ransom. 4,000 piastres by morning, or he dies. His friend Franz, short of money, runs to the one man in Rome who seems able to do anything, the Count of Monte Cristo, newly arrived and living in the same hotel. The Count reads the ransom note, hears who the captors are, and goes himself, with Franz, into the catacombs of St. Sebastian by night. There, among the tombs, the bandit chief sits reading Caesar's commentaries, while Albert sleeps peacefully in a corner. The Count reminds Vampa of his word. The Count and his friends are not to be touched. The bandit, who had not known the prisoner was the Count's friend, releases him at once and even lights their way out like a king escorting ambassadors. Albert, unshaken, asks only to finish his interrupted dance. Grateful, Albert invites the Count to Paris, and the Count accepts with precise terms, the 21st of May, 10:30, Rue de Helder. He arrives to the minute. Albert has gathered a breakfast of young society, a minister's secretary, a journalist, a dandy, and Maximilian Morel, the ship owner's son, now a cavalry officer. The Count walks in dressed with perfect simplicity and holds them spellbound. He has bought his house without seeing it, furnished it by instructions to a mute servant, carries pills of opium and hashish in a hollowed emerald, and speaks of bandits, cardinals, and sultans the way other men speak of the weather. They call him a wizard out of the Arabian Nights. Albert presents him to his parents. General de Morcerf receives him with stiff courtesy, but when the Countess enters Mercedes, She hears his voice and recognizes him. The Count notices her pallor and her trembling arm on the doorpost, and he is courteously blind to it. She asks him later, through Albert, who and what he is. The house learns only that he is a Tuscan count of fabulous wealth, soon to be the most talked-of man in Paris. The Count's new house is in the Champs-Élysées, bought unseen by his mute Nubian servant Ali, and arranged by his steward Bertuccio. There is also a country house at Auteuil that his agent has purchased for him. When the steward hears the address, Rue de la Fontaine, number 28, he turns white and nearly refuses to enter. Forced through the garden by his master, he stands on a certain spot by a clump of trees and can go no further. That night in the house, the Count hears why. Years before, the steward's brother, a Corsican soldier, was murdered in the royalist massacres at Nîmes, and the king's attorney who refused him justice was Villefort. The Corsican swore a vendetta, followed the prosecutor to Auteuil, and in that very garden stabbed him as he buried something in the earth. The steward dug up what was buried, a box, and in the box a living newborn child, which he revived and carried to the Foundling Hospital. The house the Count now owns is the scene of that crime, and the man the steward stabbed is the same prosecutor who buried Edmond Dantès alive. The Count listens without surprise, and the listener watches the web tighten. Every road, the steward's vendetta, the Auteuil garden, the hidden child, leads back to Villefort. The Count tells his shaken servant that for all evils there are two remedies, time and silence, and walks alone in the garden, reading its geography like a plan of battles yet to come. Over dinner of rare wines and stranger stories, the Count's guests at Auteuil see only glitter. They do not feel the ground they stand on. But the story has a long fuse, and it begins in the Corsican's confession. The steward, Bertuccio, tells his master everything. After stabbing Villefort in the Auteuil garden, he had rescued the buried infant and revived it, marking the linen with an H and an N under a baron's coronet before leaving it at the Foundling Hospital. His sister-in-law later reclaimed the child, Benedetto, and raised him. The boy grew up vicious, robbed them, tortured his foster mother to death, and vanished. Bertuccio himself went back to smuggling, and one night, hiding in a shed behind an inn, he watched the innkeeper and his wife sell a diamond to a Paris jeweller, and then murder the man for it. The innkeeper was Caderousse, and the diamond was the one the false Abbé Busoni had given him. Bertuccio was arrested as the killer, condemned to the galleys and saved only when the same abbé proved his innocence and sent him to serve the Count of Monte Cristo. The Count now knows his steward's whole past, and that the child in the garden, Villefort's child, may still live. The banker Danglars comes next, calling at the Champs-Élysées to inspect the mysterious millionaire who holds unlimited credit at his bank. He expects a fool he can measure. Instead, he finds a man who talks of 6 millions as pocket change, produces treasury orders for 1 million from his card case, and has identical unlimited letters from Vienna and London. Danglars, outplayed, accepts a demand for 500,000 the next morning, and admits he never knew such wealth existed. The Count, examining him through a lorgnette from behind the blinds, notes the vulture's beak and the serpent's forehead, and remarks how naturally men shrink from such a face. The Count then plays a delicate trick. Danglars, who gave 16,000 francs for his wife's famous dappled grey horses, has just sold them to the Count's steward for 30,000, pocketing a gain of 16,000. The Count promptly drives out behind the very pair, and when Madame Danglars mourns her lost horses, the banker sees them harnessed to the Count's carriage. The next day the Count returns the horses to the Baroness as a gift, each rosette set with a large diamond, enchanting the wife and humiliating the husband. Soon after, those same horses bolt with Madame de Villefort and her little son in the carriage. At the Count's gate, his Nubian servant stops the runaway pair with a lasso at the risk of his life, and the Count revives the fainting child with a drop of red elixir, warning that a few drops more would kill. Madame de Villefort, the prosecutor's second wife, leaves shaken and fascinated. Her husband comes that evening to thank the Count in person. The meeting between Villefort and the Count is a duel of ideas. The prosecutor, frozen and arrogant, speaks of law and order. The Count answers that he has studied the codes of all nations and finds the law of retaliation nearest to the law of God. He declares himself a cosmopolite with no country, no master, and no fear, whose only adversaries are time, distance, and mortality. Kings need things and men fear things, but he is beyond both. He confesses a single ambition, to be Providence himself, rewarding and punishing. Villefort, magistrate though he is, finds no answer but an invitation to see his own father. The paralyzed old Noirtier, once a fiery Jacobin, now a living corpse, as proof of what earthly power comes to. The Count watches him go and says softly that he has had enough of poison and must seek the antidote. Then he orders the carriage. It is time to visit the Morel family, the only people in Paris whose happiness moves him. The house in the Rue Meslay is the one happy corner of the Count's world. There live Maximilian Morel's sister and her husband, honest merchants who closed their office the day they had enough, and Maximilian himself, the young cavalry captain. The Count comes among them like spring. The sister shows him their treasure under a crystal cover, the red silk purse, the letter signed Sinbad the Sailor, and the diamond that was her dowry, relics of the unknown benefactor who saved their father from suicide and their house from ruin. They dream aloud of finding him and kissing his hand. The Count, deeply moved, hints at an eccentric Englishman he once knew who did good in secret, and gently tells them not to hope. Then he hears the shipowner's last recorded words, that it was Edmond Dantès who saved them, and has to leave quickly to hide his tears. Maximilian has a secret of his own. He loves Valentine, the prosecutor Villefort's daughter by his first marriage, and meets her in a walled garden behind her father's house, where he rents a patch of lucerne and plays at being a gardener so he can see her through the planks. Valentine is rich in her own right and betrothed to a young baron. Her stepmother detests her. Her only friend in the house is her grandfather, the paralyzed old man who speaks with his eyes. The two young people measure their hope in minutes and in the width of a garden gate. Meanwhile, the Count is educating Madame de Villefort, though she does not know it. In her drawing-room they talk of poisons, of Mithridates, who made himself immune, of brucine and its doses, of the Eastern art that makes a bane as precise as a remedy, and can kill through a chain of creatures without leaving a trace. She offers him her anti-spasmodic lozenges. He answers by offering his own elixir. 1 drop restores life, 5 or 6 will kill, and in wine it leaves no taste. She accepts the prescription. The Count leaves satisfied that the soil he has sown is fruitful. Society glitter continues at the opera, where the Count appears with Haydée, the Greek girl who lives in his house as his ward, covered in diamonds and drawing every eye. Fernand, the Count of Morcerf, sits with the Danglars family, and when talk turns to Yanina and Ali Pasha, he mentions his own service there a little too carelessly. He was Inspector General of the Pasha's troops, he says, and owes his fortune to that illustrious chief. Haydée hears him, sees him, and turns deathly pale. This is the man who sold her father and herself. She has to be taken home. Money war rages too. The minister's secretary calculates that Danglars has cleared 300,000 livres on Haiti bonds, and the young Viscount recalls the banker's earlier million made on the Spanish funds. But the banker's luck is turning. The Count, for his part, is drawing both the banker and the prosecutor's family toward a dinner at his country house at Auteuil on Saturday. When the young Viscount invites him to dine, the Count begs off. The Major and his son are expected, and hears instead how the Viscount's mother frowns on the Danglars' marriage while his father presses it. into this world comes an old soldier in a green Château, Major Cavalcanti, bearing a letter from an Italian abbé, a rich noble who lost his son to kidnappers 15 years ago, and is told he may find him in Paris. The Count receives him, supplies his missing papers, a marriage certificate, a baptismal register, his missing money, and his missing history, and advises him on his clothes. Then comes the son, a tall young man with light hair and a red beard, recommended by Sinbad the sailor. The Count warns him to tell no one his romantic tale of abduction, gives him money for his first expenses, and watches through a hidden panel as the false father and the false son embrace like actors on a stage, each privately congratulating himself on the price he is being paid for the performance. Both are invited to Auteuil on Saturday, where Danglars, who is to pay the young man's allowance, will meet them. The son arrives, a graceful, quick-witted young man calling himself Andrea Cavalcanti, with a letter signed Sinbad the sailor. The Count inspects him coolly, warns him that Paris mistrusts romantic biographies, and hands him money from his father. Left alone together, the Major and the young man drop their masks and compare notes. One was hired by an abbé, the other by an English lord. Both are impostors, and both mean to play the game to the end. The Count, watching through a hidden panel, sees two scoundrels and thinks it a pity they are not really related. Then he goes to the morals, preferring their disgust-proof happiness to his own company. In the walled garden, Maximilian and Valentine keep their stolen minutes. She tells him how, reading the paper to her grandfather, she saw the old man's eyes light up at the name Morel, while her father sneered at Bonapartists and the banker laughed. Noirtier, informed of the betrothal to Franz, shows furious opposition, and when the notaries come, the paralysed old man proves his mind is entire. Letter by letter, on a dictionary, he dictates a will that leaves his 900,000 francs to Valentine, unless she marries Franz d'Épinay, in which case the money goes to hospitals. Villefort storms. Valentine weeps with gratitude for the love behind the sacrifice. The will is signed and sealed. The Count, meanwhile, is seen riding out of Paris toward the Montlhéry telegraph tower. He finds the operator not at his post, but below, in a tiny garden, mourning his strawberries. The man cares nothing for the signals he repeats. Nothing new. You have an hour, and dreams of nectarines. The Count offers him 15,000 francs, then 10,000 more for a small service, to alter 3 signs in one message. The gardener, pale and sweating, transmits the false dispatch. The minister reads that Don Carlos has escaped to Spain. Danglars dumps his Spanish bonds and loses 500,000. Then the correction drives prices up and costs him another 500,000. The Count tells Maximilian he has merely discovered how a gardener may rid himself of dormice. Now the Count gives a dinner at Auteuil, and the guests are the whole board: Danglars and his wife, Villefort and his wife, Maximilian, the dandies, and the 2 Cavalcanti. The house has been transformed in days, lawns laid and trees planted, but the Count keeps one room untouched, a gloomy bedchamber hung with red damask. After a dinner of fish flown in from the Volga and Lake of Fusaro, he tells stories. The room, he says, has a feeling of crime about it, a bed that a marquise might have died in, a hidden staircase that a man might descend carrying a burden in the dark. The ladies grow pale. Madame Danglars nearly faints. Then, before the king's attorney, the Count makes what he calls his declaration. Digging in this garden to plant trees, his men found a box, and in the box the skeleton of a newborn infant. He asks Villefort what they do to infanticides in this country. Villefort answers, in a voice scarcely human, that their heads are cut off. Madame Danglars is revived with a few drops of Madame de Villefort's elixir, the same red liquid the Count once used on her son Edward, and Villefort whispers to her, "I must speak to you tomorrow in my office." The company leaves, shaken without knowing why. Only the listener sees the design. Every story at that table was aimed at one hearer, and the garden outside holds a grave that two of the guests each believe belongs to a secret of their own. As the guests leave Auteuil, a ragged man catches the false prince's arm at the carriage. The innkeeper from the Pont de Garde, come to Paris to bleed his old companion from the galleys. In the shadow of a wall, he demands money for silence. The young impostor, cold and dangerous, pays him 200 francs and promises more each month through the steward. And for a moment, each man's hand strays toward a hidden knife before they part as friends. At the banker's mansion, Danglars comes home in a rage and dismisses the minister's secretary, who has grown too intimate with his wife. Then he turns on her. She has cost him 700,000 francs in a single speculation on Spanish funds, he says, on false news she brought home from her political admirer. For years he has paid her a fourth of his winnings, 100,000 here, 250,000 there, and now he demands a fourth of his losses. Madame Danglars, white with fury, learns that her husband has seen everything for 16 years and merely waited, and that there is not one of her friends, from the prosecutor to the secretary, who has not trembled before him. Danglars is also reconsidering his daughter's marriage. He goes to the Count with his troubles. 1 million of his money is frozen with a Trieste house that has suspended payment, and his Spanish losses sting. The Count listens, then coolly dissects fortunes into 3 rates: treasures in land and funds, capitals built on companies, and the fluctuating kind that lives on banks and telegrams, and warns him what 7 more such months would do. They speak of the Cavalcanti. The Major's bond is good, the Count allows, but the family wealth is doubtful, for old Italian nobles bury their millions and live on dust. And when the Count carelessly recalls that the Count of Morcerf was once a fisherman called Fernand Mondego, and suggests that a letter to Janina might settle what part that Fernand played in Ali Pasha's fall, the banker rushes home to write. The poisoned past is closing on Madame Danglars too. She goes to Villefort's office, and the prosecutor, whom fear has made honest, tells her what he found years ago when he crept back at night to the Auteuil garden to destroy the evidence of their affair. Nothing. No child. No box. The infant he buried was alive, and someone, the Corsican who stabbed him, he thinks, took it. A woman later claimed the baby from the foundling hospital with the matching half of a torn napkin, then vanished at Charlons. And now, she cries, this Count of Monte Cristo appears and speaks of a child disinterred beneath the flowers, he knows. Villefort promises to learn who Monte Cristo really is, and warns her against everyone, above all against him. The Morcerfs are to give a summer ball. When the young Viscount calls on the Count, there is talk of the betrothal he does not want, of the Baron who is coming to claim Villefort's daughter, and of the ball his father will give on Saturday, and it is his mother, the Countess, who begs the Count to come. Villefort uses the days before the ball to make his inquiry. He visits an abbé in a small house behind Saint-Sulpice, and hears a smooth tale. The Count is Zaccone, a Maltese shipbuilder's son, living quietly on a handsome income, a charitable, harmless gentleman with one enemy, an English lord. He visits that lord in the Rue Fontaine Saint-Georges and hears the same story from the other side. The mine in Thessaly, the railway speculations, the mineral water scheme for Auteuil, and a deadly feud fought in 3 duels. Both abbé and lord are, of course, the Count himself, in wig and whiskers, lying pleasantly for 2 hours. Villefort goes home unsatisfied, but reassured enough to sleep. The ball is splendid, and Mercédès presides. She watches one thing only. The Count of Monte Cristo takes nothing, no ice, no refreshment, under her roof. She sends her son to press him. He refuses again. She has the blinds thrown open, and when the heat and the music drive the guests toward the garden, she offers the Count her arm and leads him out herself, determined to learn what his abstinence means, while her son watches and wonders too. The bread and salt refusal hangs between Mercédès and the Count like a verdict. That same night the ball breaks up early. Old Saint-Méran is dead, and his widow, the Marchioness, arrives exhausted with his body and with one fixed idea, to see Valentine's marriage to Franz d'Épinay done before she follows her husband. Within days she's struck down too, raving of a white figure in her room and a glass that moved, and dies calling for a notary. Valentine loses her grandparents almost together. In the garden, Maximilian and Valentine face the end. The marriage is to be signed. She cannot disobey a dying grandmother and an iron father. Maximilian, half mad, offers flight. His sister's house, Algiers, England. Valentine trembles and refuses, then breaks and promises, if the contract is forced on her, she will flee with him that night. He swears to wait, but her grandfather has one more move. Noirtier sends for Maximilian, and by eye and dictionary tells him to do nothing, not flight, not challenge, and to wait on him. At the funeral of the 2 old people at Père Lachaise, Franz d'Épinay meets Maximilian, each ignorant of the other's place in Valentine's heart. Then Noirtier summons Franz. The young baron is given a packet from a secret drawer, the signed statement of 3 officers, witnesses to a night in 1815. Franz reads aloud. A Bonapartist club in the Rue Saint-Jacques invited General de Quesnel, Franz's father, to a meeting, blindfolded, to sound him for the Emperor's return. The general declared himself a royalist and refused their oath. The club gave him a choice: swear silence or die. He would not swear. On the Quai des Ormes, the club's president himself fought him in a formal duel and killed him, wounded 3 times, and the body went into the Seine. Franz, shaking, demands the president's name. Letter by letter, Noirtier gives it. M-Y-S-E-L-F. The paralyzed old man, pitiless behind his eyes, confesses, I killed your father. Franz staggers away and writes to Villefort that the marriage is impossible. The Count's other instrument is advancing. Andrea Cavalcanti shines at the Danglars, singing with Eugénie, charming the banker, and Danglars, who has heard the Major has millions buried in Italian quarries, begins to prefer this plastic prince to the proud young Morcerf. And one evening at the Count's house, Albert asks to be presented to the beautiful Greek, Haydée. In her rooms of silk and cushions she receives him in Italian, and at the Count's quiet command in Greek, tell us your father's fate, but not the traitor's name. She tells her story. She is the daughter of Ali Tepelini, Pasha of Yanina, and she remembers everything: the flight to the lake kiosk, the treasures in the cavern, Selim on guard with his burning lance, the French officer sent to treat with the Pasha, the false pardon, the ring shown as token, the soldiers' daggers, the explosion in the floor, her father riddled in a whirlwind of fire, her mother's death at the sight of his head on the gate, and the child sold to a merchant and then to a sultan, from whom the Count bought her with an emerald. Albert asks the French officer's name. The Count's raised finger stops the question. Haydée weeps, and the Count comforts her like a father. But the Count knows, and the listener knows, that the man she described without naming is the man Albert calls father. Franz's letter ending the engagement arrives, and the Villefort household rearranges itself. Madame de Villefort, the stepmother, goes to old Noirtier with sweet words. Since the marriage she opposed is off, let him restore his fortune to Valentine. The old man agrees. A new will leaves everything to his granddaughter, on condition she never leaves him. The fortune that poisoners killed for is hers again. Danglars, meanwhile, rejects General de Morcerf's suit for Albert, hinting at scandals. Albert soon learns what they are. A newspaper prints that the castle of Yanina was surrendered to the Turks by a French officer named Fernand. Albert rushes to the Count of Monte Cristo, who reads it and counsels patience. 50 officers may bear that name. Seek proof before blood. He advises Albert to go to the journalist alone without seconds to give him the chance to retract freely. Albert storms off to the newspaper office, demands a retraction, and the journalist, proud and careful, refuses to retract until he is verified, and asks 3 weeks. They part as enemies, a duel pending. Death, in the meantime, is at work in Villefort's house. The old servant Barrois drinks from a carafe of lemonade, meant for Noirtier, and dies in agony of cramps, convulsions, and foam. The family doctor, d'Avrigny, tests the dregs with syrup of violets. It turns green. Poison. He tells Villefort plainly what he has suspected since the Marchioness died. A poisoner lives in this house, and the poison was meant for Noirtier. And he names the criminal. It is Valentine, he says. She prepared her grandfather's medicines, the Marchioness's draughts, the lemonade. Villefort, shattered, refuses to believe it and refuses to act. The doctor washes his hands of the house and warns him that the killing is not finished. The servants, hearing the verdict, give notice and flee. At the banker's, Andrea Cavalcanti formally asks for Eugénie's hand with his invented millions, and Danglars accepts with enthusiasm. Andrea draws 80,000 francs at once. Then he is summoned by Caderousse, now lodging as a retired baker, who has watched his prosperity with a wolf's patience. Over pilchards and wine the old man extorts him 500 francs a month, then a threat, a plan that needs no money from Andrea, only information. He makes Andrea draw him the plan of the Count's house, the garden, the stairs, the dressing room with the secretaire, and wheedles Andrea's diamond off his finger as a test. Andrea leaves uneasy. Caderousse locks the door and studies the plan like an architect. 2 nights later, warned by an anonymous letter, the Count returns secretly and waits in the dark of his dressing room. A pane of glass is cut. Caderousse enters and goes to work on the secretaire, and the lamp flares on the face of the Abbé Busoni. The false abbé toys with him, forces him to write and sign a confession that the man received as Andrea Cavalcanti is the convict Benedetto, then lets him go, telling him that if he reaches home safely, God has forgiven him. Caderousse climbs the wall, and Benedetto is waiting in the street and stabs him 3 times. The Count brings the dying man in. Caderousse, in agony, denounces his murderer. Benedetto, the convict posing as a prince. The abbé, the Count, feeds him drops of life to finish his statement, then reveals himself. Think again, he says, and the dying eyes widen. Not the abbé, not Lord Wilmore, Edmond Dantès. Caderousse dies asking God's pardon. 1, says the Count. Beauchamp the journalist returns from Yanina with notarized proof. Colonel Fernand Mondego, who surrendered the castle and sold the Pasha's widow and daughter into slavery, is the Count of Morcerf. Albert weeps and burns the papers, but another newspaper has already printed the whole story. The Count takes Albert to his house on the Normandy coast. Days of riding, fishing, and quiet. It is the last calm Albert will know. A servant races in from Paris with a newspaper and a letter from the journalist. A second article, no longer veiled, names the traitor of Yanina outright, Colonel Fernand Mondego, now the Count of Morcerf, peer of France. Albert turns white, refuses a carriage, and rides for Paris as if the ground burned. The affair explodes in the House of Peers. An honourable member reads the article aloud and demands an inquiry. Morcerf, proud and unprepared, asks to defend himself at once. That evening, before a committee, he presents his proofs. The Pasha's letters, the Pasha's ring given so he could reach the harem at any hour, and he swears the Pasha died before he could save him, and that the widow and daughter vanished. He speaks well. The room is nearly won. Then the president reads a letter from a witness who asks to be heard. A veiled woman in Greek dress enters, and at the president's request uncovers her face. Haide, daughter of Ali Tepelini. She lays down her birth register, her baptism record, and the bill of sale by which a French officer sold her and her mother to a slave merchant for 400,000 francs. Then she names him. You, she says to Morcerf, are Fernand Mondego. You surrendered the castle. You brought the false pardon. You took the Pasha's ring. You had Salim stabbed. You sold us. She shows the assembly the scar on his right hand, into which the merchant's gold was counted one by one. Morcerf cannot answer. He tears open his coat and flees the chamber, and the peers vote him guilty of felony and treason. Albert learns the rest. It was Danglars who wrote to Yanina at the Count of Monte Cristo's suggestion. He confronts the banker, who admits everything with a coward's logic. Then Albert goes to the opera, finds the Count, and before the whole theatre accuses him and throws his glove. The Count, marble calm, accepts the challenge. Pistols, 8 o'clock, Bois de Vincennes. That night, in his study, a veiled woman enters. Mercedes. She has known him from the first, she says. By his voice, before his face. She guesses everything, that his hand struck her husband down. She does not ask for Fernand. She kneels and asks for her son. The Count, with terrible gentleness, shows her the proof of his own dead life. Danglars' letter, bought with 200,000 francs. The anonymous denunciation that put him in the Château d'If for 14 years, killed his father by hunger, and gave her to another man. He has sworn revenge, he says. The duel must be. Then she asks the only thing she has left. Not Fernand's life, not Albert's victory, just Albert's life. And the Count, who loves her still, breaks. Your son shall live, he says. And, since his own honour has been publicly challenged, he tells her that the blood to stain the ground will be his. In the morning, at the meeting place, Albert rides up late, pale from a sleepless night, and before the seconds he stops them all. He has something to say to the Count aloud. He accused him wrongly, he says. The Count was right to punish Fernand Mondego, right and more than right, for the treachery at Yanina and for the 14 years in the dungeon. As Fernand's son, he thanks him for not using greater severity and offers his hand. The Count, eyes wet, takes it. The duel dissolves into esteem. Albert tells the seconds he will leave Paris and rides home to find his mother packing in silence. The Count, left among the astonished young men, thinks only of the woman who saved her son by giving up everything, and hears, as if for the first time, the cost of his own designs. General de Morcerf comes to the Count's house to demand the duel his son refused to fight. The Count does not decline. Instead, one by one he names him: the soldier Fernand, who deserted on the eve of Waterloo; the spy Fernand, who guided the French in Spain; the captain Fernand, who betrayed, sold and murdered his benefactor Ali Pasha. And then, tearing off his own cravat and coat, stands before him in a sailor's jacket and hat, long black hair rolling free, and speaks one name: Edmond Dantès. The general goes home without fighting. From an alcove he sees a hired coach in his courtyard and watches Mercedes and their son leave his house forever. As the carriage wheels cross the gate, a shot is heard from his window. In Villefort's house, Valentine is fading. She tells Maximilian, in her grandfather's room, of the plan to move out with the paralyzed old man. And between words she grows giddy, turns pale, and complains that everything she drinks tastes bitter. The old man's eyes follow her with anguish. He has known for some time what this means. When the banker's wife and daughter call to announce the marriage, Valentine falters on the stairs on her way back, and Maximilian catches her. Moments later her arms stiffen, her head falls back, and she lies motionless. The house fills with cries. Villefort runs for the doctor. Maximilian runs for the Count. At the Champs-Élysées he pours out what he overheard long ago, that the deaths in that house are poison, not fate, and that the poisoner has now reached the woman he loves. The Count's control finally cracks. "Unhappy man," he cries, "you love Valentine, that daughter of an accursed race." Then, mastering himself, he gives a strange assurance. It is noon, and if Valentine is not dead now, she will not die. The doctor, meanwhile, finds the girl still alive, and when he questions her grandfather alone, the old man reveals by signs that he foresaw the attack and had long been accustoming her system to brucine so that the poison would fail. That night, an Italian priest, calling himself Busoni, rents the house next door, another of the Count's disguises, and workmen begin repairs in the dark. At the banker's, the duel between father and daughter is colder. Eugénie refuses the marriage outright until Danglars shows her the ledgers. The bank is near ruin. A great railway grant requires 4 millions he no longer has, and only the 3 million livres of the prince's fortune, which the marriage would place in his hands, can save his credit. She bargains like a banker. She will sign for the family, but she will remain free, and the capital is not to be touched. He agrees, dreaming of turning 4 millions into 10 or 12. At the signing, the grand salon glitters. The notary reads the contract, and the baron signs. Then the Count of Monte Cristo mentions almost apologetically a blood-stained waistcoat found in his house after the murder there, with a letter to Baron Danglars in the pocket. And as the notary calls for Prince Cavalcanti to sign, the doors fill with gendarmes. A commissary asks which of the gentlemen answers to that name, and answers himself. A galley slave escaped from Toulon, accused of murdering the innkeeper, his old companion in the galleys. The room empties like a theatre on fire. Eugénie wastes no tears. That night, with her friend the singing teacher, she packs a portmanteau, cuts off her hair, dresses as a man, and drives for the frontier with a passport the Count once helped her procure. The false prince, for his part, sweeps a handful of the bride's jewels into his pocket on his way out, and runs, by cab, by horse, by night roads, with the jewels and 10 banknotes about him. At Compiègne he takes a room at the Bell and Bottle and wakes to find gendarmes on the stairs. He leaves a diamond pin on the table as payment. slips up one chimney and down another, and drops into a room where two ladies are sleeping, Eugénie and her friend fleeing the same ruin. Their screams bring the officers, and he is taken, impertinent to the last, offering to carry a message back to her father in Paris. Madame Danglars begs Villefort for mercy for Benedetto, and the prosecutor, who has buried 4 of his own, refuses her. He has sworn by his crucifix that the guilty shall die. She understands, and goes to save her fortune instead. With the minister's secretary in the little apartment they once shared, she divides the spoils of years of speculation. He hands her 1,340,000 francs, cheques and bank notes with perfect politeness and not one word of comfort. She goes out rich and abandoned. The Count keeps his vigil over Valentine. Night after night he stands hidden behind her library door, watching the woman in the white dressing gown come to poison her glass. He replaces the poisoned draught with his own. He feeds her, drop by drop, the counter-science he learned in the East. When the dose grows murderous, he gives her a pill from the emerald box and tells her not to fear whatever she wakes to. The household finds her dead. The doctor summoned finds the glass changed, no longer brucine but a narcotic, and understands that someone has fought the poisoner with her own weapons. The stepmother, her crime read in that altered glass, collapses and is carried from the room in a swoon. Valentine is buried in the family vault at Père-Lachaise, or so the world believes. Maximilian, mad with grief, is found by the Count at the cemetery and watched like a brother. Back in the Rue Meslay, the Count catches him at his desk with pistols and a farewell letter, wrestles the weapon away, and to save him tells him everything. I am the man who saved your father when he wished to die, who sent the purse and the diamond, who rebuilt the Pharaon. I am Edmond Dantès. Maximilian falls at his feet. Julie and Emmanuel weep and embrace him. The Count makes a pact, live 1 month, and if in that month he cannot cure this grief, he will load the pistols himself. At Danglars' bank, the Count presents 5 signed bonds of 1,000,000 francs each and collects the 5 million still owing on his own credit. The banker, stripped at a stroke, can only beg the charity's receiver to wait until the next day for the hospital's 5 million, and that night writes a farewell letter to his wife, takes his passport, and runs. Mercédès and Albert in their bare rooms divide their last coins. Albert sells his watch, takes 2,000 francs as a substitute soldier, and leaves his mother half. She hides her tears and lets him go to Algeria. And in the prison of La Force, in the courtyard they call the Lion's Den, Benedetto holds court in borrowed elegance, certain his unknown protector will come. The steward, Bertuccio, visits him, the man who once dug him out of the earth, and Benedetto demands to know who his protector is and who his father was. The steward answers only with contempt. You are in terrible hands. Do not play with the thunderbolt. Then the jailer calls him to the examining magistrate, and the convict goes off whistling, still sure that money will open the door. Every thread is now drawn tight for the last movement. The banker in flight, the prosecutor home to judge his own wife, the convict before his judges, the mourner in his 1-month reprieve, and the Count counting what his vengeance has cost. Villefort goes home from the inquest to pronounce sentence on his wife. He does not ask whether she is guilty. He asks where she keeps her poison and lists the dead, his father-in-law, his mother-in-law, the old servant, his daughter. She falls at her husband's feet, confessing by her terror. He will not dishonour his name with a scaffold, he says. If she is alive when he returns, she sleeps in the conciergerie. He locks her in and goes to court. At the assizes, Benedetto is led in, calm and elegant. Asked his name, he says he does not know it, but he knows his father's, the king's attorney, Villefort. In the thunderstruck silence he tells it all. Born at Auteuil, buried alive in the garden, stabbed by the Corsican who dug him up, registered as number 37, reclaimed by a foster mother, grown into forgery, theft, and murder. Villefort, broken, rises and confesses everything before the assembly and staggers out. He drives home through a haze of guilt, planning flight with his wife and son, and finds his wife dead of her own poison, and Edward dead beside her, with the note, "A good mother cannot depart without her son." He runs to his father's room and finds there, in place of the abbé, a black-haired man he last saw in a dungeon in Marseille. "Edmond Dantès," says the Count. Villefort goes mad on the spot and is found later in his garden, digging for his child. The Count, shaken to the soul, "Enough," he says, "let me save the last," takes Maximilian out of Paris. At Marseille they part. Morel goes to his father's grave, and the Count to the little house in the Allées de Mailhan, where Mercédès lives in prayer. She is gentle, aged, unresenting. She refuses his fortune unless Alba consents to it. She asks only her son's safety, which he promises. They say farewell, and from the little window of the house where old Dante once lived, Mercédès watches the ship that bears her son away and murmurs his name, "Edmond, Edmond, Edmond." Alone, the Count revisits the Château d'If as a tourist, and hears a guide tell his own legend. The dangerous Bonapartist, number 34, who sewed himself into a dead man's sack and was thrown into the sea. He sees his cell, the marks of his shoulders on the wall, the abbé's sunlines, the tunnel, and he buys from the concierge the linen manuscript Faria wrote in the dark. "Thou shalt tear out the dragon's teeth," and presses it to his heart. Danglars, fleeing with 5 millions, is taken by bandits outside Rome and held in the catacombs. There the bandit chief, true to his trade, sells him his life by inches. 100,000 francs a fowl, a fortune for bread and water, until the banker is starved to his last 50,000. Then a cloaked figure appears. "I am he whom you sold and dishonoured," says the Count, "whose betrothed you prostituted, whose father you starved, and I forgive you." He leaves Danglars his last 50,000 and his life. The banker crawls out with hair gone white. On the 5th of October, Maximilian comes to the island of Monte Cristo to die. The Count, reading in his eyes a grief beyond argument, offers him the golden box of hashish. Sleep and wake where dreams are true. Morel drinks and sinks into the dark, and wakes to find Valentine alive beside him, saved by the Count's science from the poisoner's cup. Haydée, told she is free, asks if she is to lose him, and the Count, looking into her eyes, discovers at last what has been before him all along, that he is loved. He takes her in his arms and thanks God, who sustained him against his enemies and will not let him end in suffering. In the morning, by the sea, the Count's letter reaches the young couple, his houses and his fortune for them and for the poor, and one lesson from a man who thought himself the equal of God and learned humility. Until God reveals the future, all human wisdom is in 2 words: wait and hope. What do I think this book is really about? On the surface, of course, it is a grand adventure, a wronged sailor, a dungeon, a treasure, a dazzling return. But I believe Dumas is doing something more than entertaining us. I think he is asking what happens to a good man when the world is unjust to him, and whether the revenge he earns can ever make him whole. The story begins by showing how easily happiness is destroyed. Edmond Dantès is innocent, hard-working, loved, and 3 ordinary men, not monsters, ruin him for ordinary reasons: a clerk's envy, a rival's jealousy, a prosecutor's ambition. I believe the book is drawing attention to how fragile a decent life is when the people around it are self-seeking, and how institutions meant to protect the innocent, courts, police, prison, can be turned into weapons by one frightened man with a name to keep clean. That feels like a warning to me. Injustice does not need villains in capes. It needs only small men acting in their own interest and looking away. Then the book gives its hero everything: wealth, learning, power, and lets him play Providence. And here, I think, is the heart of it. The Count is magnificent at rewarding the good. The Morel family, saved at the very minute of despair, is the warmest proof that the author values loyalty and quiet virtue. But when the Count punishes, the book refuses to let him stay comfortable. Vengeance works, and it keeps working past his intentions. A stepmother poisons a child, a boy dies with his mother, a prosecutor goes mad digging for his son in a garden. The Count himself is forced to ask whether he has done too much. I read that as the author's own doubt, spoken through his hero. Justice may be owed, but a human being who appoints himself the hand of God will strike the innocent along with the guilty. I also believe the book is quietly critical of the society it shows, a Paris where money opens every door, where a convict with jewels can pass for a prince, where titles and credit matter more than truth. Danglars, Fernand and Villefort all rise by betraying, and society rewards them for years. The story suggests that such success is not safety, it is only debt waiting to be called. And yet the ending is not bitter. The Count forgives Danglars, the most purely mercenary of his enemies, and I think that matters enormously. It is the moment the hero steps down from being an instrument of wrath and becomes a man again. The real cure in this book is not punishment. It is love and time. The Abbé's learning given in a dungeon proves stronger than the dungeon. Haydée's love pulls the Count back from the edge of the abyss he dug for others. Morel and Valentine, nearly destroyed by the same evil, are given life as a deliberate counterweight. So, what is the author trying to say? I believe it is this. Life will wound you without reason, and you cannot control that. You can only control what you do next. You may reward, that is safe and holy. You may punish, but carefully and never as God. And in the end, after all the treasure and all the revenge, the book closes not with a triumph, but with 2 words of advice. And I think they are the author's sincere ones. Wait and hope. Thank you for staying till the end of the Count of Monte Cristo. You obviously are a glutton for punishment. Please hit the like icon if you thought this video deserves it, so other people get to see it. Let me know in the comments which book you would like me to read to you next. Now YouTube have put on screen a channel subscribe icon, and below it my latest video for you to check out. See you next time.